everybody. Welcome to the workshop on Les Dames Fées, or the Ladies Fae. What I'll be covering here is material of the fairy folk in French Canadian folklore and mythology. So first of all, I'd like to present myself. My name is Eric Lashardy. I've been interested in French Canadian folklore for quite some time. I'd say at least 6 or 7 years. And it's been my mission to try and bring back the old myths from my grandparents' generation so that people of our generation can come to appreciate it. Also, I've done some translation work. Here's the book for my translation. It's called Tel que dit, which means as it was told. And it's a translation of 16 French-Canadian stories collected by Mathias Pentonville in the early 20th century. The 16 that I translated and put in here are the ones that have the most mythological content. And they are also considered to be very old in their formula and so on. So that's great. You can pick it up on Lulu or Amazon or something, and the link will be put on the video.
I have it. It's great.
There you go. We have some testimonials. This workshop here was also prepared, and a lot of research and dedication went into it. My good friend and research partner, Morgane Feu. She is a priestess on the south shore of Montreal. She does some public rituals as well, and is a member of the Feu et Cendre coven. And she's past few years been getting a lot into the same thing, her heritage, and the folk tales and so on, and to really try and bring the stuff back into the limelight. So, without further ado, we may go. So the material that will be covered here is I'm going to give you a little background on Marius Barbeau, who was the ethnographer who collected the information, and also somewhat on the storytellers, why they were such an important aspect of the culture. I mean, every culture has its bards. I'll tell you a bit about the bards from French Canadian peoples, and also how the story format is very much a shamanic journey, right? And then we'll get into the Fae, particularly the Ladies Fae, or the Dames Fées, and a lot of work has been done to kind of categorize and as ethnographers do, try and put their stamp on things, and we'll be able to discover how we can approach the Fae in this context here, now. So that's what we're going to do. So Marius Barbeau was an ethnographer. He studied under Franz Boas, who was very famous in New York City. He had been doing a lot of work with indigenous peoples beforehand, but Franz told him apparently one day, like, hey, your people, the French Canadian people, they have the most rich folk stories and tales and everything. Why don't you go up and study your own people? He's like, oh, that's great. So that's what he did. And he settled, a lot of his stories come from the region around La Beauce and Kamouraska, which is on the south Quebec. And the stories that he was collecting were from old school storytellers, a lot of them in their 70s and 80s. And with each tale that he had transcribed, like word for word, keeping all of the older euphemisms and turns of phrases and so on, he also recorded when those person heard the stories, how old they were, and so on. So some of these stories date back to the first settlement of French Canadians. So as an example, one person could have been in his 70s. He was telling the story to Marius. He had heard it when he was in his young teens from someone who was in their 80s, right? So now we're spanning a couple hundred years, roughly. The bard in the culture was very much the principal form of entertainment. And storytellers, every family had a storyteller, but a lot of them were itinerant. So they would travel from town to town, seeking lodging. Hospitality was a big thing, so you wouldn't necessarily turn away a stranger at your door. You'd invite them in. Sometimes they slept in the barn, but they were a good source of entertainment, especially in the winter months. And the the storyteller, what they would do is they were called the conteur or raconteur, basically teller of tales. What they would do is they had this old formula, story-wise, a framework with principal characters and so on. When they would come to someone's house, sometimes they would weave in the milieu, the surroundings, maybe the place where the hero was leaving. You know, his parents' homestead look a lot like the one we're staying in right now, and kind of pull all that stuff in. And also as they told the story, they could stretch it from, you know, a couple of hours to a couple of days, just by feeding in more and more and more of those little tidbits. And every night, the storyteller would leave on a cliffhanger. So then it's kind of like 1001 Nights, right? Like, it just keeps going and going and going. Most storytellers, the raconteurs, had a repertoire of approximately 50 tales, and they could interweave them and blend them together and really craft something that was specific to that setting. They also had this interesting way of making themselves a part of the tale, where at the end of the story, you know, there'd be some like big reveal, and it'd say like, yeah, and that's how it all went down. I was there, I saw it, and they sent me back here to tell you about it. And so you get also that ancient aspect of, you know, someone who's traveled into the land of the Fae, you know, who's been there, has come back. And so by doing that, the storyteller also takes on a, you know, to a certain degree, a shamanistic role, because they're bringing some knowledge from, or moral lessons from, you know, the Faelands back amongst the people. So the stories, most of the stories had specific themes. Some of them were what we would call, you know, moralistic fables. Some of them had a strong Christian bent to them, but always had some type of magical implements involved. The ones that Marius was really digging, really grooving on, such as myself, was the ones that definitely had mythological content in there, and that he could find direct comparisons with back in France and Europe and so on and so forth. And here's a statement that he said. I'm going to say it in French and then I'm going to translate in English. He says, presque la moitié des contes jusqu'ici recueillis en Canada sont d'origine et de nature purement païenne. Le merveilleux y est le principal ressort, et les personnages sont ceux des mythologies païennes de l'Europe. Si ces personnages disparaissent dans le conte plus moderne, il n'en est pas ainsi des objets merveilleux qui sont perpétués avec la ténacité au-delà de la révolution religieuse. So basically what he's saying is like, these stories are old myths that have been repackaged. They're European myths that have come here largely unchanged. They're pagan. So he's just like, let's just throw that out there. They're pagan. And furthermore, he says, you know, the stories, a lot of the things, we might lose some of the content. They may have become more Christianized, but the, you know, the magical, mythological composition is still there, and those things are retained. So some of the things I'd like to touch on as well, before we get into the introduction of the Ladies Fae, is, you know, there was a certain rules of engagement when you're dealing with the Fae, specifically in this context. And the thing is once you read the folk tales and once they're performed, and you start picking up on the little nuggets along the way that, you know, that seems important, you start to realize that what it really is, it's a roadmap. So there's a roadmap to interacting in a proper form. And some of those things are, you know, typically when someone would be meeting with the Fae, it's because they were embarking on a journey, a life-changing journey. Most of the stories start off with, you know, the main character, usually Tsijan, which is Little John. Sometimes goes by other names. But a lot of times, like, you know what? His parents would say, you're kind of a slobby teenager right now. I'm paraphrasing here. Maybe you should go out and strike it on your own. And he'd get this fabulous idea in his head, like, I'm going to be a merchant, or I'm going to be an adventuring pirate, or something. And he'd just take off. And he would walk and walk and walk, and not realizing what of a world of hurt he's going to be in by trying to, do this off the top of his head. And that's when typically crossing a forest, crossing a road, a stream, might be taking a right-hand turn at the crossroads. All of a sudden, boop, there's this person there, and the person turns out to be Fae. Little caveat here: in the French Canadian tradition, Fae doesn't necessarily mean beautiful fairy woman. Fae is a quality. It's descriptive. This chair could be a Fae chair. You could have a Fae stick or something. And basically what it meant it was something that had been enchanted with the means of affecting fate, right? So this is no ordinary stick or ordinary knife or ordinary feather. It can do something, and there's a formula with it. So he'd meet this fairy, and she would, either she or a talking horse or whomever would give them something to help them on their journey. Usually in threes, triplicates. Everything is triple, 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 triple all the time. I met three fairies. They gave me 3 things, and I used the 3 things to fight the 3 bad guys, and so on. And but the exchange that took place, and this is where the rules part comes in, is the hero had a journey they had to complete. They had implements that they were given, but usually there's something in it for the Fae. A lot of the tales seem to have left some of that stuff out, but by the time you get to the end of the story, sometimes you realize that Fae at one point was a spurned lover of the prince or the king, was a stable boy that was turned into a horse, and through the hero completing their journey, the curse is broken and the Fae get what they need. And as well as they undertake this process, there's a lot of back and forth that happens. So they would go to the Fae, they would get or actually it's kind of like they happen to meet together. Like, hey, what are you doing here? Can I help you out a bit? It's like, yeah, I'm going off to be a famous merchant or something. Okay, well, here's a fishing net. And this fishing net, you'll catch all the fish you desire. But just make sure I get some of those fish, right? And depending upon the setting of the storyteller, if they were Acadian and they were along the eastern coast, a lot of the stories had to do with fish and salt and boats and so on. And if you're on the interior, a lot of times it was traveling through the woods. There was sometimes a lot of beer and barley and cakes and things that were very much from the interior. And that was one of the important key aspects of the storyteller as well, was to make the people feel that when I'm telling you a story, you're in the myth. And this is something that Eliade has spoken about, in mythic time, hey, come with me and so on. So at the baseline, when people would work with the Fae, what they would do is they would go to somewhere, and I'm not talking about in the fairy tales, I'm talking about how people interacted. They would go to some place known sometimes as a trou de fée, or a Fae hole, yeah. Which was either a little cave or a little divot in a rock somewhere, and they would go to that place and they would leave some form of offering. Oftentimes it would be cream, milk, and so on and so forth. One of the specific antecedents of the Fae here in Canada amongst the French Canadians is because the people, when they came here, they were largely from Normandy, Picardie, La Gascogne, and to a certain extent amongst the Belgians as well. And they had fairies that were called the Nutons. And Nutons, they're kind of like, well, is it a corruption of Luton, or so on? But they're kind of like little red cap, the little red bonneted fairies. But what they did was they were really good blacksmiths. They're also really good at, which just seems kind of weird to a lot of people. Like, oh my gosh, the Faes and their, usually they're all about stones and antlers and flint rocks and stuff like that. But depending upon the context, if they're a little more, I guess you could say, dwarven in their means, lots of times they would sharpen your tools. So people would go and they would leave an old rusty axe, a bit of butter by the hole. We'll see how that goes. And a lot of times in the French Canadian stories, when Sijan is on his quest, the Fae are giving him a knife. They're giving him some type of sharp, stabby poke. Lots of times, to defend himself or to deliver, someone from some horrible imprisonment. So there's approximately 3 main classes or 3 main areas of affinity for the Fae amongst the French Canadians, and those are those that take on aspects of the woodlands. So it'd be like the queen of all the birds, the queen of all the animals. They were great stories, but when you read them, you're like, oh my gosh, this isn't very imaginative. But that being said, they're very much a straight to the point people. So, I was going off into the woods, and then all of a sudden, there was the Fae known as the queen of all the birds. Meh. There are also a lot of examples, and I would say the most of examples is the Fae as protectors. This is a big, there's approximately 30 or 40 stories in the repertoire that are all about the Fae being protectors. And there are also others that were sorcerers or magicians. Pardon me? Yeah?
Protectors of humans or protectors of spaces from humans?
Humans.
Okay.
Yeah, so they were assisting humans. Obviously, they get something out of it.
Yeah, I was just making sure.
Yeah, and usually what they got out of it was, here is this beautiful, little pond. This is where the Fae are, or here's this stone. This is where the Fae are, and they offer us protection in the sense that we go and we give them things and so on. But we also protect their habitat. So it's a two-way street, right? Which is really important. There's also Fae that gave advice. This is also a big one. So the person would be on their journey, and they're like, "Oh, I don't know what to do." I was like, "Well, hey, how about you? If you go to this place and talk to that person and do this and do that and take this magical implement and that, you'll get your result." And there's a few trials and tribulations, but usually by the end of it, if they did all those things, they got the result. These were very common in stories of lost loved ones. There is a very heavy use of a year and a day, in all these tales. So, as an example, there would be this princess. She was in, a lot of these things were, a lot of these stories had princes and princesses and so on. And it seems kind of strange, especially in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, 18th, 19th, 20th centuries here, because by that point, France had no more monarchy, but the people that came here before the revolution. So they still had all these, really deep, strong impressions about, kings and kingdoms and all that stuff, and it was really important to them. So a lot of times the good guys were kind of royalty somehow. Anyways, back home in France at that time, that wasn't the case. So usually, someone, their love was taken away from them. There was an angry, jealous stepsister who gave them some magical forget-me-water, and next thing you know, the hero forgets his true love and goes off and marries her in some far-off kingdom, and the female hero, and these are usually in the cases of the female hero, this is what it is, her love is gone. She has to get them back, so she runs into the Fae. They're like, hey, here are some iron shoes, right? And if you can wear them down in a year and a day, he'll come back to you. It's like, how do I do that? And then another Fae will say, I have some advice for you. If you walk to the sun and back you'll wear them down. Or like, how do I do that? The next fairy, hey, if I give you this, magical powder, you'll be able to walk right up to the sun. Oh, okay, cool. And then wears it off and breaks the curse. So giving advice was a really big thing. French Canadians, almost all of their like magic and divination was, who is going to be my lover? Who am I going to marry? What is my child going to be like? Like 98% of everything is, eat this apple under a moon, or eat this like salty type of cake, and you'll dream of your love, and dangle this thread and your love. So obviously that's reflected in the stories as well. So when it comes to magical objects that the hero would get from from the Fae, sometimes it's a stick, sometimes it's this is a big one, a napkin that when you set the table or set it down, there's a full feast and spread. That is handy. Let me tell you. If you have this little napkin, you just blow, and there you go. Another thing too that was really handy is sometimes you get a little piece of iron that'll be given to you, and if you set it down, it turns into a stove, a cook stove. Super awesome as well. And there was also animals as well that would help you along your journey. So some of the Fae animals would be like the eagle and the horse. Eagles and horses were like the big deal. And the eagle at times would, so with the eagle and the horse, that's oftentimes how the hero would get into the Faelands. So, or typically get out. So the eagle, and this is how we know this is like a really ancient kind of trope from the story. It's super not Christian whatsoever, unless you work into some other aspects of Christ sacrificing himself and all that stuff. But anyways, the hero's coming out of the subterranean kingdom because he was in the land of the giants under the ground, and there's like 7 suns and the moon and these fiddles, and it's pretty crazy stuff. It's in the book, but needs to get out. So there's this this giant eagle. Like, what is this, Lord of the Rings or something? And so the eagle offers passage out of the underworld or the Faelands, and it's like, look, I need some sustenance here, right? You're kind of heavy, so I like to eat some beef. And I was like, I don't have any beef. Okay, then you're going to use your magical knife and you're going to cut off a chunk of your ass or your thigh or something, and you're going to feed that to me. Like, what? And like literally it says like, un petit Jean, il a pris une tranche de sa fesse gauche, sa fesse droite. I was like, what is this? And then would feed that to the eagle, and the eagle would get him out of the Faelands. And you're like, what's that all about? Well, it's about, sacrifice. That's literally what it's about. And the whole thing about like, thighs and iron to the thighs, it's also very ancient too. Christian-Trois, and also like Fisher King and all those kind of like wounds to the thigh, and it ties into fertility as well, and what's the, I don't say impotence or whatever, but the fear of impotence amongst kings not having an heir. Yeah, thank you, heir. But there's these formulas that came with using these implements, and it's going to sound really, like I said, sometimes they're not very imaginative, but they were get to the point people. So let's say I had this stick, and this stick here can just beat people up, right? So if ever I'm a merchant and I'm along the highway, and some burly robbers come out and they want to get my stuff, I would take my stick, and typically in the stories it's called a gourdin. A gourdin is like a short little quarterstaff, and he would say, "Joue mon gourdin." Like, just have at it, stick. And just beat everybody up. Or, I have this napkin. It's like, napkin, give me food. And you think to yourself like, wow, that's not really imaginative. Like, where's the hocus pocus and everything? Like, I don't get it. It's like, no, It's not about the hocus pocus and the big magical words. It's you already have an implement, a tool that you know is Fae, and you just command it to do something, right? And I mean, the list of examples are exhaustive. Um, there's like, there's also, the eagle sometimes would give him a feather, or the white line. Okay. Every animal that's like white is Fae. Like, it's just the way it is. So it'll be like the white lion, the white eagle, the white caterpillar, what have you. So with the feather, all that the hero would have to say is adieu, egg, which is farewell, I'm an eagle. And it turns into an eagle. Or, it was the a white hair from the left paw of the lion, and it's like take your little boop, a little bit of further, adieu, lion, and just turn into a lion. Super simple, right? So, FYI, if you're working with the Fae, and I'm going to say, I think this is something that was not just amongst French Canadians here, but it was like very practical people. Just use the thing, right? Be very direct in what you're using it for, too. If you know what the tool does, this is a stick. It'll beat people up on command. I'm not going to break a sweat. All I have to say is stick, have at it. That's it, right? So, Now, when it comes to the Ladies Fae, I talked a little bit about some of the categories of, what they tend to do. So whether it's protective, whether it's offering advice and so on. But there's also very specific, I hate saying this term, but very specific archetypes. I don't like that. And it's very fluid. It's very fluid. But the thing is like there's a certain type of female presence that would be met in the stories that are very common, but there's a lot of intersection as well. So you can't ever pigeonhole. Don't ever pigeonhole the Fae. Just don't do that. But you'll have the pauper lady. She's poor, miserly. I'm so sick. I'm so poor. I have nothing. Maybe if you gave me a little loaf of bread, it could help you out. Okay. There was also the, we call them like it's Les Dames Fées. So amorphose was a dialectal form of metamorphose, which is, transformed but like transmogrified, right? And these were shapeshifters. So perfect example of this. I love her to death. She is the white cat, and so the hero is like, oh, I'm on my journey, and I'm walking, and I'm walking, and I'm walking, which is a big thing. Walking 3 times is like in every story. So walking. All of a sudden comes to a little cottage, little thatched hut, and there's this beautiful, beautiful white cat, and the cat hops into a pail with 4 toads and turns into a princess. Come on, right? But it's like, and it's so, it's pretty cool, so there's white cat, and there's like this thing about toads and everything, and you'll also have another form of transformation, which might not seem too shifty, is that whole aspect of going from the pauper to the prince, or the pauper to the princess, right? Because it was lots of times it was sometimes a curse, but sometimes it was a means of for whatever reason to disguise themselves, and that's a very powerful way of transformation as well too. You don't have to turn into a toad, just turn into someone a little different than your own station in life, which was a big deal. You also had woodland Ladies Fae, and these are the ones that you encountered in the forest that you know, they had certain dominion over creatures. Sometimes you know, these could be birds. Birds were a big one. I mean, birds and connected with the Fae is a big deal. And obviously animals as well. There were never really, in the tales, are never really super descriptive on like what types of animals. Like, I am the king of all the queen of all the weasels. Not so much. That said, though, on the male aspect, you did have the ant king and the eagle king, right? So that very very specific. Ant king is super weird in that story. Like, there's like this boat, and the boat is made of like sawdust, and like the ants collect all sawdust. It's really trippy, and that's more of a. It seems like it was more of an East Coast type of thing. Very fascinating. You also had elementals, ladies. So personifying, typically they personify fire and something water. Fire and water were a big deal. One of the stories, there's this being. She's known as the Blue Bonnet, and she's very frustrating to the hero and and sometimes the hero has brothers, right? And they have very interesting names such as, you know, Brafal, or like strong arms, and you know, he can bust oak with his fist, you know, stuff like that. But it's so fascinating to see a story where you have all these like burly, you know, dudes living in the woods, you know, and all they want is pea soup. Like, I mean, French Canadians and their pea soup, like that is the real deal. And they're trying to light a fire to get the peas going, right? And all of a sudden, there's this little blue bonnet that comes by and blows out their match. What the heck, right? Anyways, and it's a really fascinating story, and it gets really crazy at some points. But you know, and you'll also have other tales where the lady comes in on a cloud in the fog. Fog freaks me out. Okay, like where I live, there's a lot of fog, and there's like a swamp behind me, and every other evening you just see the fog rolling in, and the land behind my house, you know, it's kind of quasi wild and stuff. And you're like, yeah, maybe there's some little fae beings in there, and now they're riding in on the fog, you know. So, anyways, fog was a big deal. You also have the courtly, like, ladies. So very much like last night. For those who weren't there, I'm sorry. But you know, you have this female fae spirit who is very much, she's a princess, like legitimately a princess. And you know, lots of times her implements, or the things that she offers, are like you know, scissors, twine, thread, things that were very much tied to female weaving magic, and you know, the distaff and all those things, which I find is very fascinating. And you know, that's usually she had her own court and so on, so that's pretty cool. And sometimes the pauper and the princess switch roles. Sometimes they're one and the same person. So as I said, there's a lot of intersection here, and sometimes they're also a cat. So go figure. There's also the witch. So you can have witches who are, you know, real deal, but you can also have fae witches. Whoa, that's like so meta. And these were not the types of witches you want to run into. As an example, in one of the stories is so the hero, he stumbles across this like thatched hut. It's always like a thatched hut. You know, there's no chicken feed on it, but anyways, arrives and is like, okay, so you can stay for lodging and everything. I just want you to know that when you go out and you're like feeding the horses, you're going to feed the good oats to the black horse, and the white horse you're going to beat it to a pulp. Like, what? Hero's like, I don't want to beat the horse. Like, he's a nice white horse. Obviously, the white horse is a prince in disguise, you know, that she had transformed. And anyways, this white horse, you know, and they take off away from the evil Queen Fae, witchy person, and you know, and a lot of crazy stuff is happening. And at the end of the day, it's like That's a really bad deal. So that said, you also have, there's so much crazy stuff. I mean, as I say, just read the books and you'll see. There's also the three sisters. So three sisters comes up a lot. Three sisters come up a lot, not only in French Canadian healing tradition, folklore traditions, but also in a lot of healing traditions too. Some of I know the Pennsylvania Deitch people, they have this concept of the three sisters that help with healing, and lots of times, the device of three is very much a mnemonic device, so it helps you remember things, and so on. So an example of offerings in the tale that might not seem very much like offerings, but are pretty cool. For this example, we're not talking here about ladies, fine, but it really speaks to the character of the exchange. So in this particular story, there's a princess. She's walled up in some castle. There's some giants that are keeping her there, which is like the giants are always keeping princesses. I don't know why. It's kind of like a Mario thing. It is what it is. But these giants, who come up quite a few times, they have very specific names, and their names are things like Van Znal, so the North Wind, and you have the North Wind, and it's like the Northeast Wind, and it's never, for some reason, it's never like Northeast, South, and West. It's always like there's like crosswinds as well, but they're personifications of the wind and storms, right? And obviously the giants like to eat little humans and the heroes. So at one point, a good substitute for humans, okay, if ever like the Fae are like, we want to eat humans, is pork, okay, pork and porridge or barley or something. And there was a type of porridge that was made. It's called un bouillon. It's kind of difficult to explain because in the old-timey French Canadians, like bouillon was anything that was boiled. It's having to boil, right? You had sweet and savory. Like nowadays, like bouillon is typically it's bouillon, like it's soup base, But back in the day, what they would do too is they would make a type of beer where they would leaven it with a piece of raw dough, right? And that was called un bouillon because the action of the raw dough in the water, and sometimes it was spruce beer and stuff like that, like some real gnarly stuff. It makes the water boil without it boiling. So that's like magical as all hell, right? So a good way of incorporating that in today is pork and beer, right? Now, a lot of people also might think, well, French Canadians love their wine, and they do. And when the superintendents of New France, we're coming across here like, oh my gosh, we need more, what was it, like hogsheads of wine or something? Need more wine, need more wine. And at one point, they're like, okay, the colonies are like drinking up all the wine, and we need wine back in France. So people had to resort to other means of enjoying life. And there wasn't a lot of hops here at the time, so they'd oftentimes make spruce beer and other types of root beers and so on and so forth. And so there's a reason why you go into France, and in France they're like, we love our wine. And don't get me wrong, French Canadians love their wine, but my gosh, do they love their beer too. And that's a throwback, right? So that's a great type of non-human substitute, pork and beer. Who doesn't love pork and beer, right? It's great. A couple of the other things that we see in these journeys, like I said, we have a year and a day. There's also forgetfulness, as I mentioned. Like, man, the amount of times people forget things in these stories, you're like, really? Like, how could you forget that? There's like flying horses and unicorns and like all these things, and like, right? But lots of times they had to forget certain aspects because it would be a really boring story if they didn't. But also, there's a certain amount of insanity that happens when they're dealing with the Fae, and you have to remember the storyteller in real life, what they're getting across to people in their messages and their story and so on. Like, there's only so much craziness that they can put in there, and there's only so much craziest they can use, because a lot of times these people were absolutely crazy, and if you're a little too crazy, you probably won't be able to sit at the table and have supper with the rest of the family. So that happened. A lot of the gifts that were received from the Fae, and there's like a big list here. So, and I'm going to read it out. So you would receive, magic weapons. These could be cudgels. They could be knives, things that hurt a lot. Magical animals. So sometimes it's a companion, or some type of fetch. Or you would also get sometimes. This is really like not very broad, but magical things. So not a weapon, not an animal, but other stuff like napkins. Yeah. Oh, pardon me.
A rock.
Yeah, rock. Yeah.
Stories, yeah.
I got a rock. Exactly. A little chunk of iron. Yay. You would also transportation. That's a wonderful gift. Like, I have to go off to and there's this, like, it's the kingdom over the 7 green mountains. That was like a big deal, right? Oh, I have to go to the kingdom across the 7 green mountains. How do I get there? Oh, giant eagle, help me out here, bro. And that was a great thing. Transportation was a big deal. Think about, for people to get from point A to point B, like back in the old days, they're like, oh, we'll just take the horse and carry. If you owned a horse, you were doing good back in the old days. Like, especially here, it was like if you didn't walk, you were in trouble. Other things too that we received: social status. So, one hand, I was a farmhand. It was a poor little cow herd or swine herd. And next thing you know, I inherited all the kingdom. The king loved me so much, because I saved his daughter, that just literally gave me the whole kingdom. Happens all the time. It is what it is. Also, that would be like riches. Sometimes like, the king is so happy, or whomever, the princess, the queen, so happy. Here, take this big treasure box. Yay. You'd also love. This is where it gets a little because like it gets a very non-consenty, very quick. But if you understand, the milieu where these stories came up. Back in those days, there wasn't a whole lot of consent when it came to who you were going to marry, stuff, and that's why, younger women would be really interested in, like, who am I going to marry? Please show me, magical oracle, who I'm going to marry, because they know, like, if it's that, bleep, 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 I can psychologically prepare for the next 10 years until I meet this person, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I'm just going to do a time check, please. Okay, so that's good. I'm already over my time, but I don't care. So how can we bring a lot of these things forward into today? So I'm going to tell you about an experience, because this is all experimental. My research partner and myself, we were like, what? These stories are so awesome, and there's like a real formula to them. Let's just insert ourselves into the tale. What could go wrong, right? So we took various stories, and there's various beings in the different stories. Like, okay, so in this journey, and it was in the winter. We're like, you know what? Let's go out. We're going to go out to this little forest. We're going to walk, and we're going to walk, and we're going to walk, just like the story says, and we're going to bring different offerings. And when we get to the threshold of the woods, which is typically where one of these beings would be, we would, sit down and try and make contact of some sort with this being. And once we did make the original offerings to that, you can call them like a guardian spirit or being, things really rapidly started happening after that. So once we, got to a little clearing and started making other offerings to, so the beings that we encountered along the way was like some old lumberjack dude. That was super cool. Gave him some tobacco. That was awesome. We also encountered, white horse, eagle, and a lot of these beings that we had read about. And then at one point we're like, okay, we're just gonna like sit back, relax, and just let it come to us. And total time warp situation. How long we've been out here? It's really cold. It's chilly, and both of us had different, call them visions, call them whatever you want, but different things that came to us. And but we weren't talking to each other. We're having our own little trip here, and and then eventually came out of the woods, and then during our debrief, we were like, you know what? Since we followed all of these steps, we are now the storyteller, right? The bard who came back because we were there, right? Nobody else was there, and then we rewrote our story into the same formulaic narrative as the old tales. So through doing that process, we discovered that if you read the tales, and it's a lot better if people can perform them for you, but there's not a lot of people who are left around who can tell the old tales. If you use them as a guide, and and you embark on the journey, on the hero's journey, there's a lot of wisdom that you can gain from that, and you'll meet a lot of very interesting personages along the way. So that being said, and then you become a part of that story continuum. And really, isn't that what life is about? We're all on a journey, and and we oftentimes try and emulate the others, people that we idolize, or things that we would like to do, and we embark on a journey. It's just in this case here, if you are starting from a specific place of there's something that you need in your life, you really need some wisdom or something, you just need like something to come to your spirit, and you're not really sure how to get that, go on the journey, do the thing, right? Find a nice little the knoll is a great place to do that, because it's a safe place. We're very familiar with all the little beings here, lots of gnomes and little fae laying around, and you have, in this entire landscape, you have all of the building blocks to one of these journeys. And so you'll have to walk and walk and walk, and eventually you're going to come to either a crossroads or a forest, or I don't recommend going across the river, but and you can try. No, strongly discourage, especially right now. And you'll get to relive that. You'll get to live that journey, and hopefully by the end of it, if something comes to you, it comes to you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But in taking that journey, upon reflecting upon it, you'll start to see that, well, and maybe it's not when you were laying there, vegging out, waiting for all the spirits to come to you. Maybe it was when you were walking in, you kind of tripped over a stick. You're like, oh, what's that? And it's like, oh, insight. I have some stumbling blocks in my life, and I really have to have sure footing. There you go, right? So don't always go out there expecting for things to pop out at you and meeting old women in the forest. Yeah, sometimes it does happen. It is scary, especially when. So, I've had the experience where you're just like walking in the forest, and there shouldn't be anybody else there, and then you're like, oh, there's rando person over there.
Exactly after you invoke something.
Yeah, exactly.
Why?
It happens. It happens, but don't go out like super expecting it.
Don't go expecting.
Yeah, don't go expecting it. But be prepared. Don't expect for it to happen, but
ready.
darn well ready and
Bring
prepared.
extra underwear.
That too, yeah. Could be code brown pretty quick. So I'll just I have to kind of wrap this up here. I have a picture or an image, which is it's a tour de fée in Gaspésie, so on the backside, and I'll pass it around. It's a outcrop of stones with a natural little cave in it, and so if ever you're scouting around landscapes, this is a great way to kind of build in your bioregional kind of diversity. Know where you are and know the spirits of where you are. You go on a hike and you're like, oh my gosh, there's this rock with this giant hole in it, and then you immediately start to revere it. So anyways, so I'll just pass this around like that. Picture's a little grainy, but it's really old. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps things up.
Could a fairy hole be like a hole in an old tree? Or is it usually just a stone?
I mean, I would think that a tree makes sense. For some reason, though, it was very specifically stones.
Well, that's very Irish, Scottish,
It
Northern European, every European. Um, yeah.
absolutely. And you know, some of the people. One of the large influences too on people here was, you know, not only do we have French Canadians that came here, but you know, in the 1800s, we also had a lot of Irish come here. The French were Catholic, the Irish were Catholic. They came together. They made French Catholics, of which I am a product of, and yeah, so a lot of that got cross-pollinated. You had a question as well, or a comment? I absolutely believe that it is. Yeah. So hagstones. Yeah, absolutely. And there was also sometimes they would, if there was a hole that you could like get something through it, they would pass things
Anything
through
through
it.
it, a baby, a person,
A baby.
item.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just a thing that came to me about that, and the reason why stones and not trees, is because if you look at like Scotland and Ireland, it's stones.
Yeah.
And like not trees, like there's not like massive forests. There's like groves, you know, and there's always been like groves of like and in those like circles and those holy places, but not necessarily. And even the trees that grow there, like if you look at the royal oaks and stuff like that, like they're kind of like branch out, like really wide and really far versus like tall and slender, like it is here.
Yeah.
The salt water poisons the land of its islands, which is
Yeah, it is what it is.
everything's all that stone. And then we live on a rock. They do too.
I was just going to say, my understanding is that Ireland and Scotland were quite forested
At one time.
at one time, and then were deforested. Ireland was, I think, mostly deforested for the British Navy.
I think I've tried to research because I was curious, and it was a combination of building ships and settlements, as well as just natural deforestation from climate change, which is kind of interesting. Obviously, like our industry didn't help at all,
No.
and they can't really replant them because the climate has changed now. They have to do it completely differently. It's very interesting. But yeah, the stone here, I think it translates well here because we're on the Canadian Shield.
It does.
Everywhere, my whole yard is just like
Yeah.
mostly.
I
rock
love me
under it.
some stones.
I've got a mattress-sized stone in my basement. You know, I could just leave offerings there.
The men's energy shrine here is the only place where the shield is one of the places where the shield pops through. Yeah, it comes, it just bulges out of the earth right there. So that's why that gate is there actually.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and plus like there was amongst the French Canadians there was a view that the Fae lands were, or what they sometimes call you know, l'au-delà, which could be used for, you know, heaven, but it's also like beyond here, like
So
the
the
beyond, the other world. Yeah.
Have you? I have one more question.
Yeah.
Nerd one. Have you read the stories of the indigenous tribes in Canada and compared them?
There's a few that I have, largely when I was researching La Chascalerie, for that, like so the stone canoe and the flying canoe of the French Canadian wild hunt type thing. That's largely where I've kind of studied that.
Because I read a lot of Marius Barbo and Franz Boas and other story collectors and folklorists from out west. And
Yeah.
a lot of the stories are very similar. Yeah, there's a collection of stories. I can't remember the full title, but it's something about the dream time.
Oh yeah,
Have you read that one?
I
It's hard
know
to
the title,
read,
but I haven't
but
read it now.
the stories in it are exactly like that. They're a collection of stories about ordinary people who go for a walk or go for a journey, is a better term,
Yeah.
into the wilds and interact in all kinds of ways with superhuman beings and have crazy adventures and crazy unlikely things happen. And they usually the triumph is they come home in one
Yay,
piece,
you
alive.
made it.
Not usually very easily, or sometimes they're not happy stories, and everybody dies. And
Yeah.
sometimes you don't understand the story at all, and you have to read the folklorist notes that says like this is a metaphor for how the clouds were created.
Yeah.
It's like, oh god. But a lot of those stories are very
They
similar.
do.
It's the hero's journey, and you encounter the spirit, and that kind of thing. It's really interesting.
I think
Definitely think it was an influence out here.
definitely an influence. I mean, when when cultures are coming together, they definitely exchange stories. I mean, I have a lengthy repertoire in my stories that I tell that are very much those syncretisms that were happening. One caveat I would like to put on Marius Barbeau when it came to the indigenous peoples is that there were some groups that refused to talk with him and share things because he did like he was a researcher, right? And there's some groups that that felt that there was a lack of understanding, somewhat on his part, and also on his part as well as a researcher. This is one of the common criticisms that comes across from him is that he was looking for specific types of stories. So if you didn't have those stories for him, he wasn't that interested in talking
He was
to you.
like Michael Harnering,
Yeah.
like old Joseph Campbell, where
Yeah.
he's trying to make
And-
everything fit in the
And that
box.
could also be why a lot of the things do seem similar from his work. But that being said, he was an amazing researcher, great at like chronicling things, and like he had things down pat. So yeah, so I'm thankful for that.
And his books are translated in English, and you can find them on eBay and secondhand.
Yeah, absolutely. Except for his like if you want these types of tales, which were the actual tales of the people, they're not translated. There's many volumes, and these are all public domain ones I translated. So if you are interested in getting the original French collections as well, I can send you the link, and you can kind of compare if you're bilingual. But my purpose is to make these stories accessible to those who might have an interest in or heritage in, French Canadians, whether you're Cajun or what have you, and the stories aren't accessible to you anymore. So,
I have a question.
yes.
If I read Parisian French, can I read theirs? Probably, kind of.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's a lot better.
I'm not sure what, like, besides counting, I'm not really sure what the difference in languages is.
Well,
Like,
there is a
how-
huge difference in language.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, there's similar in a lot of ways. You'll get the gist of it.
Okay.
There's a lot of words you're not going to catch, but there's a lot of footnotes.
Okay. Footnotes and online dictionaries, I could probably.
Yeah. So as an example, like certain phrases, like this is very common. We say "barre la porte," so nobody bars the door anymore. You lock it, so you verrouille. But there's a lot of things like that. But there was some really archaic terms like the whole bouillon bit, right? I was like, what? They're making soup base? Cool. This doesn't sound like soup base at all. And then I did some research into it. I'm like, oh, okay, this is like largely a fermentation, or it's some type of porridge or something. Usually there's grain in it and it's liquidy. Yeah, leave it long enough and it might ferment. So yeah. Okay, I think that pretty much wraps it up. So thank you everybody for coming to this workshop on Les Dames Fées. So the Ladies Fae, the dames, demoiselles. And yeah, so thank you. The accolades.